Okay, guys, so we are talking today about the age of contact. What that refers to, and something we need to discuss in class, is who is contacting who. Well, the traditional words we use for this are New World meets Old World. New World referring to the Americas, but that's kind of a loaded term because the Americas have been around for millennia, just like Europe and all of that. It's this idea of the European peoples now contacting the peoples of the Americas and what happens as a result. Now, because we are in Texas history, we are going to focus primarily on the Spanish uh, contacting Native Americans in Mexico, South America, Central America, Texas, that area, rather than focusing on the English and other groups like that were here, but in terms of Texas, not really. The French we will talk about because they play a role in the region, but understand that's who we're focusing on because we're in Texas history. Now, you need to think about these guys and what it took for them to load their life onto a ship, load animals and food stores and all these things, and trust the navigator or the head explorer that they're going to be able to go out and take over things. And if you look at these things, some of these are jokes, who left the coffee pot on. Yeah, well, the idea is that they left their whole life behind. Um, they traveled in, this armor, this metal underwear. They're going to a land they know nothing about. And this last one, who brought the map? There are none. There are no maps of the area they're going to. These explorers are going to be the people who make the maps. And small mistakes can cost you your life, which we'll kind of get into and see how that works. All right. So the powers that be in Europe at this time, it's France, England, and Spain. Spain, at this point of exploration, is the big one. It is, probably Spain, then France. Probably I'm going to go Spain, England, then France in terms of strength. Uh, the reason is because at this time in history, Spain has the strongest navy, the strongest ability to reach out into the world and take over other territory. England second, France third. England will replace Spain down the line after some wars and things like that. Now, vocabulary, some kind of things we need to understand just straight off the top. Uh, who starts this thing off? Yeah, it's Columbus when he discovered the Americas. That's a very loaded term. They were already known to be here by the people that lived here. And in 1492, when Columbus arrives here to the Americas, he is not a nice guy. He is absolutely cruel to some of the people he encounters. So I want somebody to raise that in class and let's talk about Columbus because it's one of those things where we can dive in deeper to analyze a historical figure and understand more about how that may set tones for later explorers or things like that. So explorers, those are guys who went to find new things, gather knowledge. That's really what they were there for. Conquistadors are those who go to conquer, to take over new territory. So the idea of Columbus, yes, he is an explorer who will later shift into that conquistador role. So we'll see that. But again, let's talk about that in class. I'm going to bring that up as a question. I expect you to be ready. All right, the three G's: gold, glory, God. The gold one is first for a reason. We'll talk about that in class. Be prepared for that one. 1519, that is the first time that the Texas coast is mapped. It's mapped by a guy named Alonso Alvarez de Pineda, and that's the group who he's part of an exploration, and he comes in and takes really good maps of the Texas coast. Now, here's an interesting fact, just fun fact. If we go back and look at Columbus, Columbus had a navigator that made the maps for him. His name was Amerigo Vespucci, and that's where America gets its name from, because the Amerigo maps of America. So, something to know. All right, so vocabulary, a little bit more. We've got Corpus Christi de la Yeltsa. You can laugh at me as much as you want for my butchering of Spanish pronunciations. Please have fun with that one. But it is the first Spanish settlement or Spanish mission in Texas. We're going to dig further into the missions and what their purpose were and how they worked, and we'll do that later on. But that's the first one in Texas. The Columbian Exchange, that is the idea of trade being established from those colonized areas of, again, quotation marks, the New World, where Spanish have taken over an area and then created trade between their colonies and between their mother country to set up this exchange. Cortez, he's the conquistador who conquered Mexico for Spain. We'll dive into him a little bit in class. Then we have some other explorers. De Vaca, he is the first to explore a lot of Texas. He writes a book about Texas and becomes very influential on further exploration. You've got Coronado, who explores a lot of the Texas plains. You've got De Soto, who's searching for the cities of gold. We'll dig into that a little bit later. You've got La Salle, who's a French explorer, who you'll understand his relationship to Spain further down in this PowerPoint. And then Cortez, who conquered Mexico, who I believe we already covered. But let's dive into when Spain gets here. They go all over Texas, they look for gold, and they don't find any. So why stay or why come back? What is Spain getting out of this area? So let's jump into a few more things. We talked about Columbus in 1492. Now let's talk about him a little bit more in depth. Why does he go? What is his motivation to explore? He's the first son of, he's not a poor family, but he's a not super rich. He is, however, allowed to keep a percentage of everything he finds. So if he finds, I don't know, a continent full of resources, he gets a percent of that. So think about how rich you could be. He landed in what is currently called Bahamas. That's the first place he arrived. He made more than just one trip. He made several trips. He will eventually become governor of his own colony. So something to be noted there about why go. What's the motivation? Then let's talk about impact of explorers on Texas. We know the three reasons: gold, God, glory. But we need to understand what impact does this have on the land that they're exploring, the land that their conquistadors are taking over. So that's something that we're going to talk about in class. What impact is there? How much does it change the lives of those people who live here? Primarily, you've got a lot of Native Americans who are not positively affected. All right, so we will do this in class. Then let's talk about conquistadors. Spanish colonized the Gulf, including Texas and Mexico. They transferred gold and silver they obtained from Mexico making Spain very wealthy, but that made more explorers and colonists eager to go. If you're going to go over to Mexico and find all this wealth, all this gold, ooh, more people are going to want to go and try to get rich by gaining land in this area. So Mexico becomes populated by Spaniards very quickly. Texas does not. Why? No gold. All right. So more Spain, Cabeza de Vaca. Now, those legends of those 7 cities of gold, Cibola, that's the guy who spreads that legend. He does it in his book that he writes about his exploration of Texas. And then some of the men, or one of the men who survived that trip, also writes a book, and that those legends and tales they told became a big influence on why more explorers will come. So we'll talk about that. And why do you think, since they never found those 7 cities of gold, why might they tell a lie? What would be Cabeza de Vaca's motivation for telling a lie? So we'll talk about that in class. Somebody bring up in class, why would de Vaca tell a lie or tell a tall story even? All right. So Coronado, he is the guy who is going to go search for Cibola after hearing those stories. He's going to claim the land all the way up into Kansas for Spain. He finds no gold. De Soto, he's also searching, but again, no gold. And then after all this, Spain decides to establish missions there to use the land um, to create more territory, to use the land to grow crops, to do things like that. That's what most of these explorers and conquistadors find. They're like, hey, this is a great place. We can grow lots of crops here. We could make the Empire of Spain richer through using this land. We'll talk about in class how land equals wealth at this time. So bring that up somebody in class. Land equals wealth. All right, so then we get to the French. Oh, we're not talking about Spain anymore, except the impact that this French explorer is going to have on the Spanish and their desire to keep possession of the land that they've explored. So La Salle, he persuades the French government to let them go and explore the Gulf of Mexico and set a colony there. And he wants to do that on the Mississippi, but he misses. He literally misses the Mississippi, and he ends up building his colony in Texas, and it's not a successful colony. He is killed by his own men. We'll talk about that in class. Somebody bring that up. Now, I want somebody to bring this concept up in class, the donut. Let's talk about the donut in class. There are points for bringing these things up when I say bring them up in class, guys. So remember the donut. All right, now this is Spanish territory by 1790, kind of its height of territory. Look at how much of the New World or the Americas that Spanish people conquer. I mean, you've got all the way up into, almost the Canadian border. I would say that this line here goes a little bit further north than Oregon or Washington, but yeah, it's way up there. They've got all the way over to Florida. They've got the entire Gulf, all these islands in there, and then all the way down to the tip of Chile. It's insane amount of territory that the Spanish take over, and it makes their empire very wealthy. But they don't stay on top forever. We'll talk about that later. You'll learn more about that in history in 8th grade and 9th grade. But yeah, that is the Spanish. That is them taking over this territory. So we'll talk a bunch about this in class and bounce ideas